So it all started. One day, about 10 years ago, when one Narosha Murugan was cooking mashed potatoes and she burnt her hand on the pot. Now, grad student in biophysics that she was, rather than just cursing and continue on cooking as you or I might do, she started marveling at the miracle of biology that had just taken place. Without any conscious effort on her part, and almost instantaneously, her body had perceived that her hand was touching something hot. That signal shot up her arm to her spine, where a reflex response kicked in, shooting another signal back down her arm, causing her arm muscles to recoil before her brain even processed that something was happening. Things like that happen to us every day. We just accept it as a fact of life. It's just how our bodies work. But the chain of interactions that has to take place in order to make that happen is almost impossibly complex. It is nothing short of miraculous, if perhaps it takes a grad student in biophysics to help us appreciate that. But where we might say, gee, that's nifty, and just stop there and go on with our lives, Narosha Murugan could not. Long after her potatoes were done cooking, she was still wondering, how did that reaction happen so quickly? You see, the model that she had been taught, and maybe you too learned in high school biology, was one that said that much of the body's communication depends on receptors shaped to receive particular molecules. And the right molecule fits into the right receptor, and string those along in a long line, and information gets passed along your body. I brought something to demonstrate this. Finn let me borrow this morning. It works something like this. You have a molecule, and you have receptors of different shapes, and the right one finds the right hole, and boom, information is communicated through your body. Thank you, Finn Hathaway. But what Narosha wanted to know was how. How does the right molecule find the right receptor so quickly when you have literally millions of them in your body? It's like having a single block and a stadium full of these bad boys with only one right-shaped receptacle. How does the right block almost immediately find the right-shaped receptor? That it does at all defies all probability. And so, as soon as she could, she approached her advanced immunology professor with just this question. And his response was, "It's just the way it is. I don't know how it works. No one knows how it works." And with that, Narosha had found the question that would shape the trajectory of her career, all thanks to a burnt hand and some lumpy potatoes. In the course of pursuing an answer to how these molecules find their matching receptor so very quickly, she came across this very obscure research paper from the 1920s by a Russian scientist who was studying onion roots to understand better how they grow. Apparently that is a job that a person can have. I didn't know that. But in the course of his experiments, the scientist noticed something unexpected. When the onion roots were placed in complete darkness and measured with extremely sensitive instruments, the cells inside them appeared to be giving off light. Not light that was visible to the human eye, but real, measurable light. Actual photons were being emitted from these onion root cells. Now, at first, the scientific community dismissed these findings as background noise or as faulty equipment. But as measurement techniques improved over the course of decades, this same phenomenon kept showing up time and again. And so first, scientists found light coming not just out of onion roots, but also out of other plant cells. And then they discovered light coming out of the cells of rats as well. And then, eventually, they found light coming out of human cells as well. All living cells, it turns out, emit light as a byproduct of just being alive in the world. It just takes a dark room and some specialized equipment to be able to see it. Now, whether that light has something to do with helping molecules find receptors super quickly, Narosha is still working on that. But what that means is that right here, right now, in this room, every cell in your body is just churning. It is just cranking out light. You are light. Clearly, though, when Jesus says that this morning, you are the light of the world, he is speaking metaphorically. He wasn't anticipating in any way this advanced research into cellular biology, and I'm not trying to suggest that he is. But what I think Narosha's story does a great job of is steering us towards a correct understanding of Jesus' teaching in this passage. Because usually when we hear these words of Jesus, we tend to think of what he's saying is, go and do nice things. Go help an old lady across the road. Go plant a tree and so forth. And in so doing, in doing those acts, those good things, you will be light. But if we pay attention to his actual words, we will realize that that is not what Jesus is saying at all. What Jesus is actually saying is that you are already, right here, right now, sitting on your keisters as you are light. Fundamentally, that is who and what we are. Put another way, our work is not to go out and do things in order to make light. Our work is to just let it shine. It is to allow it to be visible. It is to clear away all the baggage blocking it so the world might see it and be changed by it. And so what Jesus is pointing to here is the deep and stubborn fact that human beings, before we are trained otherwise, we are naturally oriented toward love. Before we are taught to distrust, to fear, to hate, and to take advantage of our neighbors, our first instinct is to love them. Case in point, please raise your hand if you have ever met a newborn who is a vicious racist. No, you have not. Please raise your hand if you have ever met a toddler who is a Nazi sympathizer. No, you have not. Please raise your hand if you have ever met a preschooler who is constantly ranting on and on about immigrants, committing crimes, and stealing jobs. No, you have not. And the reason that you have not is because human beings in our truest God-given selves are made in love to love. We are light, says Jesus. That is who we are meant to be. But after a week like the one that we just went through, with so much violence and turmoil both inside our country and out, this admittedly might sound like a bit of a kumbaya point to make. Surely at times like these, the people of God need to hear a message a little less likely to be embroidered on a throw pillow. And that is why I want you to know that with this teaching, Jesus is not trying to offer you comfort. That is not what this is about. What Jesus is offering us and what he was offering his original listeners is a counter narrative. Because here is the narrative that we are trying to be sold right now. These are the actual words of Homeland Security Advisor and pretty scary dude Stephen Miller in an interview he gave with Jake Tapper just the other day. This is what he said. He said, "We live in a world in which you can talk all you want about international niceties and everything else. But we live in a world, in the real world, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world since the beginning of time. End quote. So what Stephen Miller is offering here is one story about the way the world works. It is a story that says that strength and force and violence is the only way to make the world better. And it needs to be said that this is a story that a lot of people believe because it sounds very grown up, very realistic, just very intuitive. But with his teaching this morning, Jesus is trying to tell us a different story about how the world works, about how the world should work. And in Jesus' story, force is not the best way to make the world better. Power is not the most effective tool for change, and violence is not an engine of human flourishing. And lest Jesus be dismissed as an out-of-touch hippie, can you please remember the context in which he was sharing this teaching? He wasn't sharing it from a palace, not from a place of safety. He wasn't backed by an army. But rather, he is a peasant talking to other peasants living in an occupied land where public violence and executions were routine and were used specifically to keep people in line, to keep them from acting up. His was a world shaped and run by people like Stephen Miller who believed that strength and force were the only things that work. And while they were busy conquering and controlling and suppressing revolt, Jesus was out walking the countryside, healing and teaching and sharing tables with people no one else would sit with. So when Jesus says that you are the light of the world, he is not ignoring brutality. But what he is doing is insisting that love and mercy and shared life do more to heal a broken world than fear and force have ever and will ever do. He's saying that beneath fear, beneath our training, beneath our stories, we are taught about strength and power. There is something already alive in us that can mend what violence only breaks. And he calls that thing light. And the work before us is not to try to manufacture it or earn it or prove that we deserve this light, but rather our work is to trust it, to live it, and to stop surrendering it to a story that says power, force, and violence is all there is. You are light, says Jesus metaphorically. You are light, says Narosha Murugan literally. So let it shine. Amen.